create time. All right, so how do you create time? Number one thing, let's look at meetings. Really count on the meetings, look at how they are running, how much time you spend on it, and is it efficient? So it's very simple. It's like, is everybody on time? I don't work with people that are late. So get everybody to say, okay, when you say 8 o'clock, it's 8 o'clock. 00, everybody on time. And when you say 8:45, we finish at 8:45, we get up and we leave there, right? And at Google, I think at one time they just said they forbid meetings that were longer than 30 minutes.
Yep.
For a good reason. So manage your time. So I say manage your meetings, fix them the time, require that people are prepared, and very simple. At the beginning of the meeting, just say who is the owner of this meeting. And people say, I don't have a meeting, cancel the meeting. And says, oh, you are the owner of this meeting. You require this meeting. So you are the client of this meeting. All right. So what do you need so that this meeting is short and very successful for you? And the person will say, I need this, and that. Then get everybody to focus on that, finished, and end the meeting.
Hervé, I'm so happy to have you on my show, The Mike Show. And I'm super delighted. The conversation we had earlier about how you are the whisperer for the top CEOs and leaders in the world, from your own learnings, and not just a success coach or a leadership coach, but from your own personal learnings, you are building a system to help these people navigate through these very difficult times. Starting a company, running a company, growing a company, completely different things. So over to you. Give us an introduction of who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much. You get me so excited, Mike. You know, the young guys there, going out there, informing people. Thank you for inviting me. It's really an honor. I'm so passionate about it. We could be here all day just talking about what to do and what not to do. So very quickly, I have 3 citizenships. I'm French, I'm American, and I'm African, from a country called Ivory Coast. I traveled the world, visited about 30 countries, and spent about 22 years in Silicon Valley, of which was just about 10 years in startups. So my professional training was really coming out of Berkeley to work when we were creating the internet. So I'm older than I might look.
Oh, no way.
So we were creating Unix, which is the most used operating system. Is probably on your iPhone right now, and your internet is using it. We were creating this thing. We had no idea it would become what it is. Otherwise, I would have patented. I would have done something, right? And I would be maybe $1 billion guy. But anyway, it was really exciting. So I went through a couple of big companies like Xerox, Hewlett Packard. I was at Xerox Parc at the research center when they were creating actually MPEG, the compression. All of that was created just next door. So it was really exciting. And then I got to really work with CEOs. And then at one point of my life, I decided basically to work for myself. And really what turns me on is to really support people. So after this startups, we sold one of them went to the stock market. I decided to basically redesign my life. Now I'm based in France, and now I advise people that want to be advised.
That's great. That's fantastic. And I think what you said there about, what you did earlier, not knowing how it will now be used in modern day tech, it must be quite interesting for you, because to see that come a full circle, not a lot of people can claim that.
Yeah, thank you. It's one of the hardest thing and most incredible thing was to trust my instinct, trust my passion, which I think we all need to do, and just do something completely crazy and trust yourself. I left Silicon Valley. Nobody does that. When I came to France, people said, what the hell are you doing here? In a much more complex country with not nowhere near the entrepreneurship you have over there in the US. And everybody thought that was crazy. But I thought, I trust myself and I want to succeed here, actually, because it's actually somehow easier to succeed in France. And now France has a tremendous number of startups, by the way, right? There's a whole wave of this. And there's many reasons why startups are easier even to start in France than elsewhere. And I thought that I saw that, plus some personal choices that I made. And basically, you have to trust yourself. If you trust yourself and your capacity to continue, then you can take pretty difficult decisions.
That's interesting. In your experience, if a founder or a senior leader of a big company, or doesn't matter, it could be a startup founder, but a leader in a position either by choice or by accident, in your experience, what are the top 3 things that they should do to be successful?
Okay, so I'll differentiate a little bit the CEOs and the guys that are up there in big companies, because they don't have the same kind of pressure, right? Okay. They want to try to navigate, they're thinking a few years, they have maybe 10 years in their mind, 5-6 years. In startups, you have 6 months, you have 1 year, right? At best, you have 2 years. So when you talk to this crowd, you have to really be thinking about those kind of things. So 3 things I would say to a CEO of the startup, using what worked and what absolutely didn't work and cost us. And surprisingly, it will not be about the product or the thing you're excited about. It's the process around it, right? One of the process is decision making. And decision making needs to happen at the top guys, the top 2, 3, 4, 5 guys at the top, including the CEO, maybe his partners, his brother, his friends, his family, whatever. Those guys, they need to learn to manage trust. That's the number 1 thing. Because when it works and you get all excited and you think everything works and you have your few wins, it looks okay, right? But at one time, the market will test you. It will change, or it will not be exactly the same positioning you need to. And you need your senior team to be super smart and to be agile. So most of the failures I've noticed come from those guys are not talking to each other anymore, or not really talking to each other, or one guy makes all the decisions, blah, blah, blah. These dynamics basically makes the startup riskier, and depending on one person's intuition, right? Instead of, let's say, 5 people. So I would say, number 1, focused on creating trust at the top level. The 4 top guys, they need to be coached. They learn how to manage trust, how to communicate. All these leadership dynamics is really, really important, right? I have clients, I have a startup now I work with. They came to me because they couldn't talk to each other anymore. Wow. It was not about making more money or increasing the market, because they were saying, we're dead. Forget the valuation. We are not even talking to each other. Wow. Right? We're going to sell it at the lowest price because we're so fed up with it. What do we do? So they came to me to recreate that. And today, 1 year later, they completely re-engaged, and their target in terms of valuation is 3 times. 3 times. Wow. We can't even believe it. So that's number 1. Number 2 is really, you sometimes you have to realize that. Please forgive me, I think you're young and you like really real terms, but I would say don't eat your own bullshit. What I'm saying is you're making amazing assumptions that this thing is going to work and it's going to be great, right? And it's good because you're motivated and you have a few successes there. But does it scale? Okay, you have 2, 5, 10 clients, and you're telling your investors this will scale forever. All right, just like any good business plan is full of bullshit, right? It's like a Excel curve, and it's all like going up.
I'm yet to see a business plan going down. Yeah, that's true.
They all look the same. The revenue curves move like this, right? This is not what happens. So sooner or later, you need to manage your assumptions, right? And you need to just say, here's this target. And we thought they were going to buy, for instance. And you find out that it's slow. It's not as slow as it is. So you had an assumption. You need to check these assumptions. You even need to write them down. We expect that this market, this thing, is going to be selling by so much. And you check that. And if you're humble enough to come back and say, well, that was not the right assumption, who else What else? How can we turn this thing and be agile with it? So that, for me, cost me millions of dollars in my first startup, because we created basically the home router. The router you have at home, we created it 15 years ahead of time.
Wow.
Right? So every home has a router. The protocol there that probably running with Unix again. And the fact that you can access it with a web interface, we created that in Silicon Valley. And we were 15 years ahead of anybody else, right? It came out 15 years later. So, we couldn't see the market. We had the assumption that we would put that to every small business and banks and insurance, small stores, and we do that, which was a great idea, and investors loved it. But that's really hard to sell. It's too cheap or too expensive to do that. The business model was not right. But we didn't check our assumptions, right? So later on, we managed to validate that this thing that we had would sell very well somewhere else. So that's why I'm telling you, number 2 is be aware of your assumptions, write them down, and manage them. You can time them and so forth. So that's really like one of the biggest lessons that I had in terms of startups, right? To just say, don't eat your bullshit. I have startups that just say, hey, we are conscious that right now our bullshit sells. Sell more. But at one point, people will know it's not that, they will know it is actually there. And then you need to change and come up with another story. But at least it's conscious. So I have other companies I can name. I'm afraid of naming their names. They became so successful and got bought by a huge, big company, because they had this great excitement about digital learning, which now is huge, but they were the first guys. So big companies bought it for hundreds of millions of dollars, and then they realized, okay, now the sexy thing is gone. What do we do now when we have a lot of competition and people are catching up? We need to change what we do and solidify that. So that's what I would say. And maybe the third thing would be inside the company. Most of the failures in a startup come from inside the company. So you want people to collaborate. If you're a CEO, you want to make sure the guy in charge of supply chain speaks to the people in customer service, for instance, right? So that they anticipate, here's what's going to really happen, and get the real internal story. And you want the customer service guys to talk to the technical sales people, and you want them to talk to the QA people, and you want them to have a great relationship, right? An informal relationship, which has an impact on the engineers that are really designing things. And you want the senior CEO, like the chief technology officers, to be reachable. So all this collaboration there helps all parts of the startup really collaborate. Because often, you know what, the guy that's in charge of the inventory doesn't understand what's really going on, right? And you think he does because he's a VP of right next to the CEO. But when you put all of these people together, which I do all the time, it's like the right hand is not talking to the left. They're so busy, right? That the right hand is not talking to the left hand. Unless you have a system around that to do that, you have all these disconnects that can cost a lot for a startup. So you need to somehow not underestimate all the dynamics that a good product manager would do. So if you're a good startup, the guy that is a good product manager there, if it's not a CEO, it should be really reporting directly to the CEO. So you need to really have good product managers that are people-oriented, because those guys are going to need to hear all the details and work all the disconnects from inside and from outside and make friends with the salespeople, blah, blah, blah. These guys need to be geniuses. And typically a good product manager ends up with his own startups, actually.
True, that's very true. So would you say that the top three, to summarize, will be sort of trust, don't eat your own bullshit, and make sure there are no silos? Is that kind of...
Yes, there will be silos, this is by nature, we humans love silos.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So you can't just say, let's break all the silos. That doesn't mean anything. All right. There will be silos, but the CEO knows that, but he needs to make it his job to create bridges between the silos. Second thing is that the product managers in there, the real product managers, if there is one, should report directly to the CEO. And that person needs to be another bridging mechanism, right? And it's a very interesting job because you need to understand all the parts of the company and make friends with everybody. And it's a really complicated job. When you're a CEO, you have authority. But when you're not, you really need to be really diplomatic, influential, getting the right information, and influence in the right direction.
Give us a little practical tip for somebody as a founder who genuinely doesn't want to eat their own bullshit, but kind of have this belief system, have a vision. How can they stress test that and make sure that they are not caught up in a whimsical fancy? Is it just doing a product market fit test? Or what's the best way to break that illusion if there is one?
Well, I learned from the best, right? And these guys were absolutely amazing. And actually, it turns out that my first CEO in my startup was a French guy. Fortunately, he's dead now. His name was Jean Gastinel at a startup called Freegate. And he came to me, and I knew nothing about startups. I came out of Xerox, big company, and you're thinking gigantic, you have budgets way up there, right? And it was changing all the IT system there. And I get into a startup where we needed to negotiate to have access to a computer and a desk, right? We had no money whatsoever. We were just 10 people. He came to me and we had no sales. And he said, Hervé, when you get our first payment, make that payment $1. And I want to see the first check, all right? Not a check you write to yourself. I just want to see the first check. Yeah. And he got the first check. And one day he was elated. He came to us and he said, and he showed to all of us a check. It was for $1. And he showed it to us and he said, we are in business. And we all understood the thing. It's his bottom line. He sold. Which means you basically validate the process. You validate that there is a market there. Okay, it doesn't mean scaling, but it means that you found somebody that trusts, that believes your story, and is willing to put money behind it. Very quickly, he found investors that bring a bunch of money into it. But that's not proof. Proof is the market, somebody out there spends money, and you find out how far and how much they would pay for it. So basically, you check your own reality. Does it sell? How quickly does it sell? To who does it sell? And you use it very much as the indicator for basically checking reality. It's basically, it makes sense, but sometimes with all the excitement around it, you may not do that.
That's very interesting you say that, and thank you for sharing that, because I'd like to ask you your approach if you are really in something high-tech, deep technology, and something that you just said, that you built a technology for home routers, which was 15 years ahead of its time. Peter Thiel generally says, especially in his book, one of his books, he mentioned that the ultimate responsibility of a company without having morals involved is to have a monopoly. That's the number one task. And he also says to find that next company will be most likely something that will catch on 10 or 15 years from now. So it's the investor's job to hunt for something that they believe will be the next trending thing in 10, 15 years. If a startup founder is building a startup which is going to catch on in the future, and it's a bit of luck, isn't it? There's no real guarantee it will. Like, for example, smart tech clothing. So smart clothing, it was a huge thing 10 years ago, even 15 years ago. It has not caught up as fast as everyone thought it will. So what, in your opinion, if you have a founder coming to you saying, I have something which is really futuristic, I don't know if it's going to work, how do I not make the mistake of, continuing flogging a dead horse?
Well, there's so many issues in what you say, but one of the things that is truly really important is when I come, whatever the idea is, I would come to the guy and see how passionate he is about it. And he says, why are you so passionate about it? And I would let that influence me myself very much. So whether there is proof out there or not, I wish, why is he passionate about this thing? And what is the solution? What is the problem it solves, right? And see, it creates value to who? So forget the money game. I'm really not interested in the money game, to be honest with you. I think for me, money is a consequence of the value you create. So it is not the ultimate thing. If you speak about money, you will lose the whole point. So that person needs to say, the world needs this, and here's why the world needs that. And I may not have validated it, and Steve Jobs did that. Steve Jobs did very few market studies, if any, right? But he came with some kind of convincing thing because he kept talking to a bunch of people and came with an absolute conviction that something would work, right? And he would learn from his mistakes and whatever. But he became really, really good at that, right? When he came back to Apple. This story is amazing. This amount of clarity was about understanding this is what we need to be passionate about. This is what we are about. This is your identity. This is what I want to do in this world. And I found this saying that I think the whole world needs. And here's what the whole world needs or will need. And then I said, wow, let's try to do something with that. And not look so much for proof, for money issues, and then you begin to really engage with people that can understand what you want and then want to get behind it and create value behind it, and then eventually, sooner or later, you're going to get actually some funding, some money, some excitement about it and everything. So it's really coming back to what is the thing you're passionate about it? Explain it to me in human terms. Why should I be excited about it? That's at least my measure.
Makes sense. And when you do find somebody like that, how I understand you've written a new book at the moment. It's out on Amazon.
Actually, yes. Thank you. Allow me to make a little bit of that.
Do. Go ahead.
This is a work of my life. I don't know if it's clear. You can see it clear.
You can see it clear. Yeah.
Red color of the sky is your sky extremely exciting. It's really about visualizing success, not doubting about yourself, having a vision, but also equipping yourself, right? Otherwise, if your dream is not backed up by craft, this is just illusion, right? So you need to become really, really, really good and keep working on it and be agile, because what you really want to create may take a different form. And so you need to manage really your vision, but manage also how you get there, be really efficient. You need to learn to manage your investors because they can really derail you. And you can waste a ton of time with your investors and be influenced by them, whereas they don't know any more than you do. So managing your investors is really, really, really important. And rely on the people below you to be very creative, to bring you all kind of ideas and be agile with all of those things, but stay aligned and then use all this intelligence behind you. I'm not sure I respond to your question, but it's fascinating to be in startups because you just don't have one single function, you have several jobs, right? So in large companies, unfortunately, you're limited, okay, you're the HR guy, or you're the purchasing guy, or you're the whatever guy. And that may work for some people. In startups, you can't do that. You have to understand much more than that, and everybody has to have 2-3 jobs up and down and working on that, and that's really exciting, right? So you need to be a leader, you need to be diverse, passionate about it, believe in what you're doing, and then also humble because it's really hard.
No, that's interesting. You mentioned about there's a truism in the fact that in films, the traditional films, the old sort of films, were all about the auteur and finding the author who really drives the film, right? Orson Welles, Hitchcock, people like that who drove films from scratch. And there is the sense in startups that the person who founds the startup has that quality in them. So they need to have this passion which is so strong, and belief system which is so strong that it'll like a magnet, it'll attract amazing people around them, and hopefully also take that story further. What happens when these startups start to scale up, in your experience? Is there a way to save them from the corporate trap? I'm not saying, corporates are bad. It's got multiple talented people. I think you said that as well when we were talking earlier. But it's that they find it difficult to even get little things approved. But is there a way, if a startup is scaling up and will do really well, now it knows its trajectory, how not to fall trap to the corporate way of life?
Yeah, that's actually, that's a good problem, by the way. It means you've been so successful that a big company wants to acquire you.
Makes
so
sense.
that means, hey,
Yeah.
and I want this problem every day, right? Okay. But I have actually one of the startups with one of my clients right now. They're preparing ahead of time for this.
Wow.
So they're assuming success. And we spoke really about the valuation of your company is going to be really impacted by your capacity to execute. Because, a big company wants to acquire these startups, right? But what do they acquire?
Yeah.
Right? So what I actually learned from my first CEO, which was a great learning, is they don't just buy your product. They buy your people, they buy your processes, they buy your credibility, they buy the certainty that it will fit into their system. And they buy your time so that you do the migration nicely. And they're hoping you don't jump out of the startup and you stay there long enough, because they have their own craziness, right? And making the transition from one craziness to another craziness, most of these merger acquisitions actually do not work. Right? And you sell your startup, you want to get out of there. You say, okay, listen, I'm burned out, I'm divorced, I'd like to get my life back and my kids back and go to the islands. And then they say, no, stay a couple of years more, right? And 3 years more, and everybody begs you to stay there. That transition is really difficult and needs to be prepared a little bit ahead of time, all right? So that's not really what's happening today. You get there, we found a buyer, let's get out of there, and 2 out of 3 founders exit. One guy may stay there, or if they leave there, then the people below says, where are we today? And here comes a huge corporate machine wanting to proceduralize everything and functionalize everything, and you have guys that come in and say it needs to fit into this spreadsheet thing, and it's horrible. And then, like I see another startup that I worked with, and I warned them, their people left. They lost 50% of their intelligence. People just went somewhere else immediately. In digital learning, people move very, very quickly. So they simply got out of there because the management just messed it up. So this is change management. People need to come ahead of time and say, when we make the transition, how are we going to be doing it? It's also different. In some businesses, don't really go into purchase. They actually run the whole show. And I can see, I have another client which is a family business, and they see that they're a $100 million company. Within 2 years, they're going to be a $300 million company, right? The business model is right there, they know it. So we started working because I told them, you're just not ready by any chance of an imagination, because you're not going to be able to triple your people or triple your processes or any of that. Right? And the way you're running it today, basically all these disconnects are going to multiply by 10.
Yeah.
Right? So how are you going to be running these things? And they come in and says, okay, we really need to look at being really highly efficient, managing our time, our meetings, how do we hire people? How do we keep people in? We need to really become really excellent. Actually, much better even than the corporate people, because they're managing this transition. So I have a client with whom we just say, let's train the top guys. That's what we do. We accelerate them in terms of leadership, management, communication, mindfulness, We teach them how to meditate, in the crisis right now with the virus, they all are like in fear,
Sure.
in a world of terror, right? And people are saying, well, the virus is going to disappear, but it may come back, so we need to all have immunization. That's madness. That's completely madness. So you need to really train those people on mindfulness, managing your emotions, taking the right decisions, really mending because there is really bad blood often in companies when people stay together. There's really people, I don't like you, I don't like you, I don't forgive you. You need to correct those things. You need to heal those things that have, in the first 4 or 5 years, there has been a lot of damage happening, right? People have suffered. One of my clients, out of the top five people, 3 divorced.
Wow.
And the fourth one was on burnout when we started, and another one was nowhere. Right? He was like, you'd ask him, how is everything? He says, everything is wonderful. Hello? Ask him for anything. Say, what do you think of this? Oh, it's great. So basically the guy disengaged, right? So you get him back into disengagement and all that. So this transition from successful startup to the next step, a quick answer to your question, thank you for your question, is really preparation. Is really just say, how are we going to make this incredible transition and keep our promise, keep what we really are about, and not lose these values. What we really were about was this. And if you manage that, this is going to be lost and merge into something else that the corporate system will want. And it's lose-lose.
That's interesting. From our point of view, I think it's about making sure that the people who are watching it get expert opinion and help from people like yourselves, and get inspired and make some amazing companies and make the right decisions. So if they want to come to you, what's the best way? Do they contact you through the website or drop you an email?
Very simple. Hervé.com.
Brilliant. Perfect.
Right? Hervé@hervé.com. I'm here. We do a free strategy sessions all the time, and it's wonderful because you usually have absolutely wonderful people that come and say, look, I'm really excited about this. Here's where I am. And we do an analysis of the situation, a diagnosis. We do a strategy session, and we just get where they are in the range of the evolution of a startup. And then we know what's really risky at that time and what plan they should have at that time, right? When the guy is further, then it's slightly different, etc., etc. So they come in, and it's really very humble and very courageous to just be thinking, I need to find the right guys at the right time that can support me.
That's amazing.
And of course, those guys, I think, need to have some serious proven experience, right? So that they don't give you advice that doesn't stand. So you need to be very cautious about that. But the openness to not be too excited, to not be too certain, and just to say, who can support us, can challenge us, and help us being as aware of all the factors ahead of us, so that when we make our decisions, we're really well informed. So it's a good practice to find the right outside expert that can support you.
That's fantastic. And I think you said it right. It's about helping them be more aware and make informed decisions. And people like you are out there to help. But Hervé, thank you so much for your time. I truly enjoyed talking to you.
I get so excited about it. Sometimes you can have just one single conversation,
yes,
and everything changes, and it's like a magical miracle happening.
It unlocks everything
in that world. So I'm very honored to be speaking with you, Mike. Thank you very much.